The weight of distance, the silence on Pluto, was unlike anything Sarah Chen had ever experienced. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the absence of everything that usually filled the spaces between thoughts. No wind, no insects, no distant traffic hum, just the soft whisper of her own breathing inside the environmental suit. She walked slowly across the nitrogen snow. Each step left a perfect impression in the crystalline surface. The prints stretched behind her in a straight line, disappearing into the pale horizon. In 37 years of life, she had never felt so alone or so at peace with that loneliness. The sun hung in the black sky like a bright star, nothing more than that. From here, Earth was just another point of light among millions. Sarah paused and looked up. Somewhere in that darkness, people were having arguments about money. Children were learning to read. Lovers were meeting for the first time. All of it happening in a tiny pocket of warmth around that distant star. Her suit's heater hummed quietly. The sound was comforting. It reminded her that she was still alive, still human, even out here in this frozen wilderness at the edge of the solar system. She had come to Pluto to study the ice formations. That was her job. But really, she had come to think, to find some kind of clarity in this place where everything unnecessary had been stripped away. The research station was 2 kilometers behind her now, a small cluster of domes, connected by covered walkways, home to 12 people who had chosen to spend 2 years at the farthest reaches of human exploration. Dr. Marcus Webb was probably still in his lab, analyzing ice samples under the microscope. Dr. Elena Rodriguez would be checking the atmospheric monitors, and Dr. James Lee Yu would be in the communications array, maintaining contact with Earth. Sarah had told them she was going for a routine survey walk. That was true, but not complete. She needed time, alone with her thoughts, time to process what she had learned 3 days ago in that static-filled video call from Earth. Her marriage was over. The words still felt strange in her mind. 15 years with David, and it had ended with a conversation full of delays and digital artifacts. His face pixelated on the screen as he explained that he couldn't wait anymore, that he needed someone who was actually present in his life, someone who wasn't always looking toward the next distant world to explore. She understood. That didn't make it hurt less, but she understood. The snow crunched under her boots. Each step was deliberate, careful. There was something meditative about the rhythm. Step, pause, breathe. Step, pause, breathe. The pattern helped quiet the endless loop of conversations she would never have, apologies she would never get to make. Up ahead, the terrain began to change. The flat plains gave way to gentle hills covered in formations that looked like frozen flowers. Methane ice, sculpted by processes that took centuries to unfold. Sarah approached the nearest formation with the careful reverence of someone entering a cathedral. The ice flowers were taller than she was. Their petals caught the distant sunlight and threw it back in subtle rainbows. Blue, silver, the faintest hint of gold. She had seen photographs of these formations, but being here among them was different. The scale, the silence, the way they seemed to pulse with their own slow life. She sat down on an outcrop of water ice and let herself really look. Time moved differently here. A day on Pluto lasted more than 6 Earth days. The seasons took centuries to change. Everything happened slowly, gradually, with a patience that human life rarely allowed. Maybe that was what she needed to learn. Patience with herself, with the choices that had brought her to this place, with the loneliness that felt so heavy and so necessary at the same time. Her suit's display showed that she had been walking for 3 hours. The research station was just a dark spot on the horizon now, barely visible against the pale landscape. She should probably head back soon. The others would start to worry if she stayed out too long, but not yet. She wasn't ready to return to the warmth and noise and human complications of the station. A meteor streaked across the black sky above her, a brief flash of light that appeared and vanished in seconds. Out here, shooting stars were common. Pluto's thin atmosphere and low gravity meant that even small pieces of space debris could put on spectacular shows as they burned up in the nitrogen sky. This one was different though, brighter than the others she had seen, and it seemed to be coming closer instead of burning up in the distance. Sarah stood up slowly. Her heart began to beat faster. The meteor was definitely heading her way, and it wasn't slowing down. She started to run. Chapter 2. Impact. Running in low gravity while wearing an environmental suit was more like controlled floating. Each step carried Sarah several meters forward in long dreamlike bounds. Behind her, the meteor grew brighter and larger. She could see it clearly now. A chunk of rock and ice about the size of a car, glowing white-hot as it plowed through Pluto's thin atmosphere. The sound reached her a few seconds later. Not the sharp crack she might have expected, but a deep rumbling vibration that she felt through the ground as much as heard through her suit's external microphones. The kind of sound that spoke of enormous forces and ancient processes. Sarah tried to calculate where it would hit. Her mind, trained by years of scientific observation, automatically began working the angles and trajectories. The meteor was coming down fast and steep. It would impact somewhere behind her, probably in the area where she had been sitting among the ice formations. She stopped running and turned around. There was no point in trying to outrun the shock wave. Better to face it and try to keep her balance when it hit. The meteor struck the surface with surprising gentleness. Instead of a violent explosion, it simply disappeared into the nitrogen snow with a soft thump that sounded almost apologetic. A small cloud of ice crystals puffed up from the impact site, glittering in the starlight like scattered diamonds. Then the ground began to shake. Not violently, but with a steady, rhythmic tremor that seemed to come from deep beneath the surface. Sarah's suit registered the vibrations through its feet sensors. The shaking continued for almost a minute, then gradually faded to stillness. When it was over, something had changed in the landscape around the impact site. The ice formations looked different somehow, more symmetrical, more purposeful in their arrangement, as if the meteor's impact had awakened some kind of organizing principle in the frozen ground. Sarah walked back toward the crater. Her steps were even more careful now. The meteor had been small, but any impact could destabilize the terrain. She didn't want to fall through a weak spot in the ice into some hidden cavern system. The crater itself was disappointingly ordinary. A shallow depression in the snow, maybe 3 meters across, with the meteor sitting at the bottom like a dark, cooling coal. But around the edges of the crater, something extraordinary was happening. The ice formations were growing, not quickly. Nothing happened quickly on Pluto, but visibly. New crystalline structures were emerging from the ground in slow motion, adding layers and complexity to the existing patterns. It was like watching flowers bloom in extreme time-lapse, except this was happening in real time. Sarah knelt at the crater's edge and activated her suit's recording systems. Whatever was happening here, it was unlike anything in the geological literature. The meteor impact seemed to have triggered some kind of crystallization process in the nitrogen ice, but that didn't make sense. Nitrogen ice was relatively simple stuff. It didn't form complex structures like this. She reached out to touch one of the growing formations. The ice was warm, Not warm enough to melt, but noticeably warmer than the ambient temperature. Her suit's thermal sensors confirmed it. The entire area around the crater was radiating heat. That definitely didn't make sense. The meteor had been small, and it had already cooled to match the surface temperature. There was no energy source that could account for this level of thermal activity. Unless the meteor wasn't just rock and ice. Sarah activated her suit's spectrometer and aimed it at the object in the crater. The readings were strange. The meteor showed signatures of elements that shouldn't exist in stable form. Heavy isotopes that should have decayed millions of years ago. Molecular structures that seemed to violate basic principles of chemistry. But the strangest thing was the pattern in the spectral data. It wasn't random. There was organization to it. Structure. Almost like information. Sarah sat back on her heels and stared at the meteor. In her 15 years as a planetary geologist, she had examined thousands of rock samples from across the solar system. She had never seen anything like this. The object in the crater wasn't just a piece of space debris, it was something else entirely. Something that was actively changing the landscape around it. The ice formations continued to grow as she watched. They were beautiful in their complexity. Spiraling towers and delicate bridges that connected in impossible ways. The whole area was beginning to look less like a natural formation and more like architecture. Alien architecture, designed by minds that thought in ways completely different from human minds. Sarah's training told her to collect samples and return to the station immediately. This was a discovery that would change everything humanity thought it knew about the outer solar system. But something deeper, some instinct she had developed from years of field work, told her to wait, to observe, to try to understand what she was seeing before she disturbed it. She settled into a comfortable position and watched the ice city grow around her. The patterns were hypnotic, fractal structures that repeated at different scales. Geometric relationships that seemed to follow mathematical principles she didn't recognize. It was like watching the universe write poetry in crystalline ice. Hours passed. The distant sun moved across the black sky with imperceptible slowness. Sarah's suit kept her warm and supplied with air, but she was beginning to feel the effects of the low temperature. Her fingers and toes were getting numb despite the environmental controls. She would need to return to the station soon, but the ice formations showed no signs of stopping their growth. If anything, they were becoming more complex, more organized, more purposeful. Sarah activated her suit's communication system and tried to contact the research station. Static filled her helmet speakers. She tried again, adjusting frequencies and power levels. Still nothing but white noise. That was concerning. The communication range of her suit was limited, but she should still be able to reach the station from this distance. Unless something was interfering with the signal. She looked around at the growing ice structures. Many of them had developed into tall spires that reached up into the thin atmosphere. Could they be acting like some kind of antenna array, blocking or disrupting radio communications? Sarah tried her emergency beacon. The device was designed to punch through interference and alert the station if she was in trouble. But when she activated it, nothing happened. The beacon's status light showed that it was functioning normally, but there was no indication that the signal was getting through. She was effectively cut off from the outside world. The realization should have frightened her. She was alone on the surface of the most distant world in the solar system, with no way to call for help. But instead of fear, Sarah felt something closer to wonder. Whatever was happening here, she was the first human to witness it. She was part of something unprecedented. She decided to stay and observe for as long as her suit's power would allow. The environmental system was rated for 8 hours of continuous operation. She had been out for about 5 hours, which gave her 3 more before she would need to return to the station.
3 hours to try to understand the most amazing thing she had ever seen. Chapter 3. The architecture of ice. As Sarah continued to watch, the ice formations began to take on recognizable shapes. Not recognizable in any human sense, but geometrically consistent. Patterns that repeated and evolved according to rules she could almost grasp. It was like watching the construction of a city designed by mathematicians who understood dimensions beyond the usual three. The structures grew upward and outward from the meteor's impact site in concentric rings. Each ring had its own architectural style, its own organizing principles. The innermost ring, closest to the crater, consisted of tall spires that twisted as they rose like frozen tornadoes made of crystalline ice. The second ring was composed of lower, broader structures that resembled flowers or sea anemones. The third ring featured delicate bridges and arches that connected isolated towers in ways that seemed to defy gravity. Sarah found herself thinking about cathedrals, about the way human architects had learned to build structures that inspired awe through the careful manipulation of space and light. These ice formations had the same quality. They weren't just random crystallization. They were designed to create a specific emotional response in anyone who saw them, but designed by what or whom? The meteor itself had stopped glowing, but it continued to emit that strange warmth. Sarah's spectrometer readings showed that the object was somehow converting matter at the quantum level, transforming simple nitrogen ice into increasingly complex molecular structures. It was like watching evolution happen in fast forward, except instead of biological organisms, the evolving entities were geometric forms made of frozen gas. Sarah moved carefully among the growing structures, documenting everything with her suit's cameras and sensors. The ice formations weren't just static sculptures.
Look at this. It starts with simple counting 1, 2, 3, 4, then basic arithmetic, addition, subtraction, multiplication, then geometric relationships, pi, the golden ratio, prime number sequences. Sarah studied the data with growing recognition. These were some of the same mathematical principles she had perceived in the ice chamber. It's like a first contact protocol. Exactly. Liu's enthusiasm was infectious. Whoever sent these signals was trying to establish a baseline for communication. They were teaching us their mathematical language. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, carrying coffee, and looking like she hadn't slept much either. The satellite imagery is even more interesting in daylight. The ice formations aren't just growing, they're reorganizing themselves. The whole structure is becoming more complex and more symmetrical. She activated the wall display and showed them the latest images from orbit. The impact site had transformed overnight into something that looked less like a natural formation and more like an alien city. Spiraling towers, delicate bridges, crystalline domes that caught and reflected the distant sunlight. "It's beautiful," Rodriguez said quietly, "but it's also completely impossible according to everything we know about ice crystallization." Webb joined them, carrying equipment cases and wearing the focused expression he got when faced with an interesting scientific puzzle. "I've prepared everything we'll need for comprehensive analysis: spectrometers, sample collectors, core drilling equipment. If there's something unusual about the chemistry or physics involved, we'll find it." Sarah felt a familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness. She was about to lead her colleagues into an encounter that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the universe, but she was also confident that they were the right people for this moment. Their combined expertise and open-minded approach to scientific investigation would be essential for understanding what they were about to experience. The journey back to the impact site took them across the same ice plains Sarah had traversed the day before, but now she was seeing the landscape with different eyes. The subtle patterns in the snow, the way the light reflected off the ice formations in the distance, the mathematical relationships that seemed to govern the placement of natural features, it all looked like part of a larger design. "There it is," Webb said, as they crested a low ridge and the ice city came into view. The others fell silent as they saw the scope of what had grown overnight. The crystalline structures now covered several square kilometers, rising from the snow like a frozen garden of mathematical forms. The tallest spires reached almost 100 meters into the thin atmosphere, their surfaces carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as they watched. "My God," Rodriguez whispered, "this is impossible. Ice doesn't form structures like this." Liu was already taking readings with his communication equipment. "I'm detecting active signals, much stronger than what we picked up at the station. It's like the whole formation is functioning as some kind of transmission array." Sarah led them carefully through the outer ring of formations. The structures seemed even more beautiful and complex than they had the day before. New patterns had emerged overnight. New connections had been made between different sections of the city. It was as if the entire formation was evolving according to some internal logic. "The thermal readings are off the charts," Webb reported, checking his instruments. "These formations are generating their own heat. There's some kind of active process happening at the molecular level." They approached the crater where the meteor had landed. The object itself was still there, but it had changed. What had been a rough chunk of rock and ice now appeared polished and symmetrical. Its surface was covered with the same intricate patterns that decorated the surrounding ice formations. "It's been modified," Sarah observed. "Or maybe it's been modifying itself." Rodriguez knelt beside the crater and began taking detailed measurements. "The molecular composition is unlike anything I've seen. There are isotopes here that shouldn't exist in stable form. Crystalline structures that violate basic principles of chemistry." Liu's equipment was registering intense signal activity from the meteor itself. "Whatever this object is, it's definitely the source of the communication signals, but the patterns are much more complex now. It's like it's been learning." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "Learning from what?" "From us," Liu said quietly. "From our responses to the initial signals. It's been adapting its communication protocols based on our attempts to decode its messages." Webb looked up from his sample collection work. "That's not possible. You're talking about an intelligence that can process information and modify its behavior in real time. But this is just a meteor." Sarah looked at her colleagues, seeing the same mixture of excitement and fear that she had felt the day before. They were on the verge of a discovery that would change everything, but they were also facing something that challenged their fundamental understanding of what intelligence could be and how it could manifest in the universe. "I think we need to consider the possibility that we're dealing with something genuinely alien," she said carefully. "Something that operates according to principles we don't understand." Rodriguez stood up from her measurements, her face pale but determined. "If that's true, then we have a responsibility to approach this as carefully as possible. First contact protocols, if such a thing is even possible with something this strange." Liu nodded. "We need to try to communicate, to establish some kind of dialogue. If this intelligence has traveled across space to reach us, it must have something it wants to share." Webb was still struggling with the implications. "But how do we communicate with a rock? How do we establish dialogue with a crystalline formation?" Sarah remembered the chamber at the heart of the ice city, the patterns on the walls that had seemed to respond to her presence, the feeling of being taught, of receiving information through channels that bypassed language entirely. "I think I know a way," she said, "but it will require trust, and it will require us to accept that we might be changed by the experience." She led them deeper into the ice city, toward the central chamber, where she had experienced the most intense contact the day before. The formations around them seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if they were aware of the approaching visitors and were preparing for something significant. At the heart of the city, the spherical chamber waited,
but it had grown larger overnight and more complex. The walls now showed moving patterns of incredible intricacy, mathematical mandalas that formed and dissolved in endless variation. "This is where it happens," Sarah said quietly. "This is where we can make contact." Her three colleagues stared at the chamber with a mixture of awe and apprehension. They were scientists, trained to observe and analyze and understand. But this was something beyond the reach of conventional scientific method. This required a different kind of courage, the courage to step into the unknown and trust that they would find something wonderful there. Chapter 6: 4 Minds, 1 Message. The chamber had indeed grown larger overnight, now accommodating all 4 researchers comfortably. As they stepped inside, Sarah felt the familiar shift in perception that she had experienced the day before. The patterns on the walls seemed to respond to their presence, becoming more active and more complex. Liu's communication equipment immediately began registering intense signal activity. "It's responding to us," he said with barely contained excitement. "The signal patterns are changing in real time based on our presence." Webb was taking readings with his geological instruments, trying to understand the physical processes that were creating the moving patterns on the walls. "The ice is somehow reorganizing its molecular structure continuously. It's like watching matter think." Rodriguez had activated her camera systems and was documenting everything. But as she watched the patterns shift and flow, she began to lower her equipment. "I don't think photography is going to capture what's really happening here," she said quietly. "This is something that needs to be experienced directly." Sarah nodded. She had come to the same conclusion during her first visit to the chamber. Whatever intelligence was trying to communicate with them, it wasn't using channels that could be easily recorded or analyzed with conventional instruments. "I think we need to approach this like meditation," she suggested. "Try to quiet our analytical minds and just be open to whatever wants to communicate with us." The 4 researchers settled into comfortable positions in the center of the chamber. The patterns on the walls seemed to respond to their stillness, becoming more synchronized and more purposeful in their movement. Webb was the first to experience the contact. His eyes widened as patterns of light and meaning began to flow directly into his consciousness. I can see how the ice is being constructed, molecule by molecule, according to mathematical principles that describe the structure of space-time itself." Liu gasped as his own contact began. "It's showing me the signals, not just the patterns we detected, but the whole communication system. There are networks of these entities spread across the galaxy. They've been trying to make contact with emerging intelligences for millions of years." Rodriguez began to tremble as information flooded into her mind. "The patterns, they're not just decorative, they're maps, star charts showing the locations of other worlds where contact has been made, and Earth is marked as a candidate species." Sarah felt the familiar expansion of consciousness that she had experienced the day before. But this time it was stronger, more focused. The alien intelligence was using the combined minds of all 4 researchers to create a more complex communication channel. Images began to flow through their shared consciousness. Views of distant worlds where similar ice cities had grown after meteor impacts. Civilizations that had learned to work with the alien intelligence, incorporating its mathematical principles into their technology and their understanding of the universe. But they also saw worlds where the contact had been rejected or feared. Civilizations that had destroyed the ice formations and driven away the alien presence. Some of these species had continued to develop on their own, but others had stagnated, missing crucial opportunities for growth and understanding. "It's not trying to control us," Sarah realized, speaking the word. "It's not trying to control us," Sarah realized, speaking the thought aloud as it crystallized in her mind. "It's trying to teach us, to show us possibilities we haven't imagined." The patterns on the chamber walls pulsed with what felt like approval. Through their shared connection, the 4 researchers began to understand the true nature of what they were experiencing. The alien intelligence wasn't a single entity, but rather a collective consciousness that had learned to encode itself in mathematical relationships and crystalline structures. Webb's voice was filled with wonder as he processed what he was seeing. It's showing me construction techniques that work with natural forces instead of fighting against them. Architecture that grows rather than being built. Cities that evolve to meet the needs of their inhabitants. Liu's communication expertise allowed him to perceive deeper layers of the message. The signal networks. They're not just for communication, they're for sharing knowledge across vast distances. Any species that learns to interface with this system gains access to millions of years of accumulated wisdom. Rodriguez saw the artistic and cultural implications. The patterns aren't just functional, they're beautiful. This intelligence has learned to create meaning that operates on both logical and aesthetic levels simultaneously. Science and art unified in ways we've never imagined. As their understanding deepened, the chamber began to show them more specific information about Earth and humanity's place in the galaxy. Images of their home world appeared in the flowing patterns, blue oceans, green continents, the sprawling lights of cities at night. But these weren't just observational images. They were diagnostic scans, showing the health of Earth's ecosystems, the stability of its climate, the distribution of its resources. And the picture wasn't entirely encouraging. It's been watching us, Sarah realized, monitoring our development for
How long?
The answer came not in words but in a deep knowing that settled into all their minds simultaneously. Thousands of years, the alien intelligence had been observing human civilization since its earliest stages, waiting for the right moment to make contact, waiting until humanity had developed enough scientific sophistication to understand the message. But before it was too late to benefit from the knowledge, Webb saw complex diagrams showing sustainable technologies that humanity could develop. Energy systems based on quantum crystallization processes, manufacturing techniques that worked in harmony with natural cycles, transportation methods that used the underlying geometric structure of space-time itself. Liu perceived vast databases of information about other species' evolutionary paths, civilizations that had faced the same challenges Earth was now confronting. Resource depletion, environmental degradation, the difficulty of transitioning from a competitive to a cooperative social structure. Some had succeeded in making the transition, others had failed catastrophically. Rodriguez saw the cultural and philosophical frameworks that successful species had developed, ways of thinking that valued long-term sustainability over short-term gain, social structures based on cooperation rather than competition, art and science integrated into unified approaches to understanding reality. But underlying all of this information was a sense of urgency. The window of opportunity for Earth was limited. Humanity was approaching critical thresholds in its development, points where the choices made in the next few decades would determine whether the species survived and prospered or collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. We're meant to be ambassadors. Sarah understood suddenly. This intelligence chose to make contact here on Pluto because it knew that only people with the right combination of scientific training and exploratory spirit would be present. We're supposed to take this knowledge back to Earth. The chamber pulsed with confirmation, but it also conveyed the challenges they would face. Human society was not well prepared to accept evidence of alien intelligence, especially intelligence that challenged fundamental assumptions about how the universe worked. There would be fear, skepticism, attempts to suppress or weaponize the knowledge. Webb saw the political implications clearly. Governments will want to control this. Military organizations will see it as a threat or an opportunity for advantage. Corporate interests will try to exploit it for profit. Liu nodded grimly. and the scientific establishment will be split between those who embrace the new paradigm and those who reject it as impossible. Rodriguez understood the cultural barriers. People's entire worldviews are built around the assumption that humanity is alone in the universe. This will challenge every religious, philosophical, and social framework we have. But the alien intelligence had anticipated these challenges. It began showing them strategies for gradual disclosure, for building networks of understanding individuals who could help humanity navigate the transition. The ice formations themselves were part of this strategy. They would continue to grow and evolve, providing undeniable evidence of alien intelligence while also serving as communication nodes for ongoing contact. There will be others, Sarah realized. More meteor impacts, more ice cities. This is just the beginning of a longer process of contact and integration. The patterns confirmed her understanding. Over the coming months and years, similar formations would appear at other locations throughout the outer solar system. Each one would be slightly different, adapted to the specific conditions of its environment and the needs of the humans who discovered it. But the success of the overall project would depend on how well the first contact team, the 4 of them, managed the initial revelation. They were the proof of concept, the test case for whether humanity was ready to join the galactic community of evolved civilization. The weight of that responsibility settled over them like a heavy blanket, but it was balanced by the incredible opportunity they were being offered. Access to knowledge and technologies that could solve Earth's most pressing problems. Guidance from intelligences that had successfully navigated the challenges that humanity was now facing. Webb broke the long silence that had settled over the chamber. How do we even begin to share this? How do we convince people that what we've experienced here is real? The answer came in the form of practical demonstrations. The chamber walls began showing them techniques for creating smaller ice formations that could replicate some of the effects they had witnessed. Ways to demonstrate the mathematical principle underlying the alien intelligence. Methods for establishing communication protocols that other scientists could verify and reproduce. Liu's eyes lit up with understanding. We can create a reproducible phenomenon, something that other researchers can experience for themselves. The evidence won't just be our word, it will be direct contact with the intelligence itself. Rodriguez saw the documentation possibilities, and we can record the environmental effects, the energy signatures, the mathematical patterns, even if we can't capture the subjective experience of contact. We can document the objective changes in physical systems. Sarah felt a plan beginning to crystallize in her mind. We start small. We document everything we can here. We create reproducible demonstrations. We identify other scientists who are open-minded enough to accept the evidence. And we build a network of understanding before we go public with the full implications. The alien intelligence pulsed with approval. This was exactly the kind of careful, systematic approach that had worked with other species. Gradual revelation, building understanding, step by step, allowing people time to adjust their worldviews without triggering panic or destructive reactions. But even as they planned their approach,
the transformation began with whispers in the scientific community. Dr. Elena Rodriguez preliminary reports, carefully crafted to seem like routine geological surveys, began circulating among researchers who specialized in extremophile biology and astrogeochemistry. James Liu's communication protocols, disguised as experiments in quantum entanglement, found their way to physicists working on the frontiers of information theory. Dr. Marcus Webb's crystalline formations, presented as novel applications of pressure and temperature manipulation, sparked interest among materials scientists who had been searching for breakthrough technologies in manufacturing and construction. But it was Sarah Chen's comprehensive documentation that provided the foundation for what would become known as the Pluto Protocols, a carefully structured approach to revealing the reality of alien intelligence to a world that wasn't entirely ready to accept it. The beauty of the approach was its scientific rigor. Every claim could be tested, every phenomenon could be reproduced, every piece of evidence could be independently verified. The alien intelligence had designed the revelation process to work within the existing frameworks of human science, even as it gradually expanded those frameworks to encompass entirely new possibilities. Dr. Kenji Nakamura at Tokyo University was among the first to successfully reproduce the crystalline formation techniques. His initial skepticism melted away as he watched simple ice crystals reorganize themselves in response to focused thought patterns, following mathematical principles that seemed to violate thermodynamics, but worked with perfect consistency. It's not that the laws of physics are being broken, he reported to his colleagues. It's that we're discovering laws we didn't know existed. Quantum consciousness effects that operate at macroscopic scales under specific conditions. Professor Maria Santos at the University of São Paulo independently confirmed Liu's communication protocols. Her team successfully established quantum entanglement connections with the Pluto formation and began receiving structured information that demonstrated clear signs of artificial intelligence. We're not just observing alien intelligence, she told her research group, we're actually communicating with it. And it's teaching us things about the universe that we never imagined. Dr. Amara Okafor at the University of Lagos made perhaps the most significant early breakthrough when she applied the crystalline formation techniques to traditional African mathematical systems. The results were spectacular. Ice sculptures that incorporated geometric principles from ancient Yoruba art, creating patterns that bridged human cultural knowledge with alien intelligence. This intelligence isn't trying to replace our knowledge systems, she explained in her groundbreaking paper. It's showing us how to integrate them into a larger understanding of reality. But the revelation process wasn't limited to academic institutions. The alien intelligence had identified individuals in various fields who could contribute to the gradual disclosure process. Artist Chen Wei in Beijing found herself creating sculptures that seemed to anticipate the crystalline formations before she had any knowledge of the Pluto discovery. When she eventually learned about Webb's work, she immediately understood the connection and began incorporating alien-inspired mathematical principles into her art. Composer Sarah Mitchell in London began writing music based on the harmonic relationships she perceived in Liu's communication protocols. Her compositions seemed to resonate with the quantum frequencies that the alien intelligence used for interstellar communication. Philosopher Dr. Rajesh Gupta in New Delhi developed conceptual frameworks for understanding consciousness as a fundamental property of the universe, providing the theoretical foundation for accepting the reality of alien intelligence operating through crystalline structures. The network of understanding individuals grew organically, each new person who successfully made contact with the alien intelligence becoming a node in an expanding web of communication and cooperation. But the process was carefully managed to prevent premature public disclosure. Sarah and her team remained at the Pluto station, serving as the primary communication hub between the alien intelligence and the growing Earth-based network. The Ace City around their research station had evolved into something that resembled a vast university, with specialized chambers for different types of knowledge transfer and collaboration. The Chamber for Scientific Communication had grown to accommodate dozens of simultaneous connections, allowing researchers from around the world to collaborate directly with the alien intelligence on problems ranging from climate change to sustainable energy to medical breakthroughs. The Artistic Collaboration Chamber had become a space where human creativity interfaced with alien aesthetic sensibilities, producing works of art that operated on both human and alien levels of meaning simultaneously. The Philosophical Dialogue Chamber served as a meeting ground for different forms of consciousness to explore questions of meaning, purpose, and the nature of existence itself. But perhaps most importantly,
The Strategic Planning Chamber had become the headquarters for coordinating humanity's gradual transition toward galactic citizenship. Here, human planners worked with alien intelligence to navigate the complex challenges of revelation, integration, and cultural evolution. Webb had adapted remarkably well to his role as humanity's primary liaison for technological transfer. The alien intelligence had shown him manufacturing techniques that could revolutionize human industry while remaining within Earth's ecological limits. Solar energy collection systems that operated at near-perfect efficiency, transportation technologies that used quantum manipulation of space-time to minimize energy consumption, construction methods that could create materials stronger than diamond from simple atmospheric gases. The technologies aren't just more advanced, he explained to the growing network of collaborators. They're based on completely different principles. Instead of fighting against natural forces, they work with the underlying structure of reality itself. Liu had become the master of interstellar communication, establishing regular contact with alien intelligence networks around dozens of other star systems. Through these connections, humanity was beginning to learn about the galactic community it was preparing to join. There are thousands of species in the network, he reported. Some are biological like us, others are purely energy-based, and still others exist as distributed consciousness in crystalline matrices. But they all share a commitment to cooperative evolution and sustainable development. Rodriguez had perhaps undergone the most profound transformation. Her artistic sensibilities had expanded to encompass forms of beauty and meaning that operated on geological and astronomical scales. She had become humanity's primary interpreter of alien aesthetics, helping people understand that the alien intelligence experienced and created beauty in ways that were both familiar and completely revolutionary. Art isn't just decoration for them, she explained. It's a way of thinking, a method of problem solving, a form of consciousness itself. When they design a crystalline formation, they're not just creating a functional structure, they're composing symphonies in frozen mathematics. Sarah had evolved into something like a bridge consciousness, equally comfortable thinking in human terms and alien mathematical relationships. She found herself serving as the primary translator between the two forms of intelligence, helping each side understand the other's perspectives and needs. But even as the revelation process proceeded smoothly, all of them were aware that they were approaching a critical threshold. The network of understanding individuals on Earth was approaching the size where it could no longer remain secret. Soon the reality of alien intelligence would become public knowledge, and humanity would face its greatest challenge since the development of consciousness itself. The moment of global revelation came not through planned disclosure, but through an event that the alien intelligence had been monitoring with growing concern. Climate monitoring stations around the world began detecting anomalous atmospheric changes, subtle shifts in temperature and pressure patterns that suggested the Earth's weather systems were approaching a critical instability threshold. The alien intelligence, through its global network of human collaborators, immediately recognized the crisis. Without intervention, Earth's climate would shift into a new stable state within the next few decades, one that would make large portions of the planet uninhabitable for human civilization. Sarah received the urgent communication while she was in the strategic planning chamber at the Pluto station. The patterns on the crystalline walls shifted from the usual calm mathematical progressions to rapid urgent sequences that conveyed the gravity of the situation. "They're accelerating the timeline," she told her 3 colleagues. "The climate situation on Earth is more critical than anyone realized. The alien intelligence says we have maybe 5 years to implement large-scale technological changes, or human civilization faces collapse." Webb immediately understood the implications. The gradual revelation process was designed to take decades. If we have to compress it into 5 years, there's going to be massive social disruption. Liu was already working to expand the communication network to handle the increased information flow. We need to bring more people into the collaboration network, and we need to do it quickly. The alien intelligence has technologies that could stabilize Earth's climate, but only if we can build the infrastructure to implement them. Rodriguez saw the cultural challenges clearly. People aren't prepared for this. We're talking about revealing alien intelligence and implementing revolutionary technologies simultaneously. The psychological and social impact will be enormous. But the alien intelligence had anticipated this possibility. Through the network of chambers in the Ice City, it began sharing emergency protocols that it had developed for exactly this situation. Other species had faced similar crises during their development, and the galactic community had learned how to manage rapid technological and social transitions. The key was creating what the alien intelligence called stability anchors, institutions and individuals who could maintain social cohesion during the transformation process. These anchors would include religious leaders who could help people integrate alien contact with their spiritual beliefs, political figures who could manage the governmental transitions, and cultural figures who could help societies adapt to new realities. Sarah found herself coordinating a global communication network that included some of the most influential people on Earth. The process had been in development for months, with the alien intelligence subtly preparing key individuals for the revelations to come. Cardinal Martinez at the Vatican had been experiencing what he thought were mystical visions, but which were actually carefully crafted communications from the alien intelligence designed to help him understand that contact with alien life was compatible with Catholic theology. President Chen of the European Federation had been receiving strategic advice through channels she assumed were advanced AI systems, but which were actually guidance from the alien network about how to prepare her government for technological revolution. Dr. Rashid Al-Mansouri, the Secretary General of the United Nations, had been working with what he thought were breakthrough climate models, but which were actually alien analyses of Earth's environmental systems. The revelation process began with a carefully orchestrated series of announcements from trusted institutions around the world. The Vatican released a theological statement affirming that contact with intelligent alien life would represent expansion of God's creation rather than a challenge to religious faith. The European Federation announced the discovery of revolutionary climate stabilization technologies. The United Nations called for an emergency session to address what it termed unprecedented opportunities for global cooperation. But the real revelation came through direct demonstration, using the network of crystalline formations that had been secretly established at research institutions around the world. The alien intelligence began manifesting itself in ways that could not be denied or explained away. At Tokyo University, Dr. Nakamura's ice formations suddenly expanded into room-sized structures that began displaying real-time weather data from around the planet, along with detailed proposals for atmospheric modification technologies. At the University of Sao Paulo, Professor Santos' communication equipment began receiving detailed engineering specifications for fusion power systems that operated on principles human science had never discovered. At the University of Lagos, Dr. Okafor's crystalline sculptures began demonstrating manufacturing techniques that could convert atmospheric carbon dioxide into advanced construction materials. The global response was exactly what Sarah and her colleagues had feared: panic in some quarters, skepticism in others, and attempts by various governments and corporations to seize control of the alien technologies for their own advantage. But the alien intelligence had prepared for these reactions. The crystalline formations were designed to respond only to genuine collaborative intent. Attempts to exploit or weaponize the technologies resulted in the formations becoming inert. Only researchers and organizations that demonstrated authentic commitment to global cooperation could maintain active contact with the alien intelligence. Within weeks, the world had divided into two camps: those who embraced the reality of alien intelligence and began working with it to address Earth's crises, and those who rejected the evidence and retreated into denial or hostility. Sarah found herself at the center of a global transformation that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Humanity was being offered the knowledge and tools it needed to survive and prosper, but only if it could overcome the competitive and territorial instincts that had dominated its history. The alien intelligence was patient but firm in its requirements. The climate crisis meant that time was limited, but the technologies it was offering required cooperative implementation on a global scale. Nations would have to work together, corporations would have to share resources, and individuals would have to accept radical changes in how they lived and worked. It's not just about accepting alien intelligence, Sarah realized during one of her communication sessions with the network. It's about humanity growing up as a species, learning to think and act collectively instead of just individually. The process wasn't smooth. There were setbacks, conflicts, and moments when it seemed like the revelation might trigger more problems than it solved. But gradually the combination of undeniable evidence and urgent necessity began to overcome resistance. The crystalline formations continued to grow and spread, appearing in major cities around the world and offering direct contact with the alien intelligence to anyone who approached with genuine openness and collaborative intent. The communications were always adapted to local languages, cultures, and knowledge systems, making the alien intelligence accessible to people from every background. Artists found their creativity expanded by exposure to alien aesthetic principles. Scientists discovered new paradigms that revolutionized their understanding of physics, biology, and consciousness. Engineers learned to build technologies that worked with natural systems instead of against them. But perhaps most importantly, ordinary people began to experience direct contact with a form of intelligence that was vast, ancient, and profoundly committed.
Epilogue. The Long View. 10 years after first contact, Sarah Chen stood in the observatory of New Geneva Station, humanity's first permanent settlement in orbit around Jupiter. Through the massive windows, she could see the swirling clouds of the gas giant below, but her attention was focused on the small bright star that was Earth, now just another point of light in the vast cosmic display. The view reminded her of that moment on Pluto when she had first looked up at the night sky and felt the weight of cosmic isolation. How different everything seemed now. Earth wasn't isolated. It was part of a vast network of conscious beings that spanned the galaxy. Humanity wasn't alone. It was part of a community that had been waiting for millennia to welcome a new member. The transformation hadn't been easy or complete. There were still conflicts on Earth, still people who rejected the reality of alien intelligence, still problems that couldn't be solved by advanced technology alone. But the overall trajectory was clear. Humanity was growing up, learning to think beyond the limitations of a single planet and the immediate needs of individual survival. The crystalline formations that had started as mysterious alien artifacts had evolved into something that was neither purely human nor purely alien, but a genuine fusion of the two forms of consciousness. They served as communication networks, manufacturing centers, artistic installations, educational facilities, and spiritual gathering places all at once. The children who had grown up with these formations thought differently than previous generations of humans. They understood mathematics as living patterns, saw consciousness as a fundamental force like gravity or electromagnetism, and approached problems with an intuitive grasp of systems, thinking that amazed their elders. Sarah's own daughter, born 3 years after first contact, could communicate with the alien intelligence as naturally as she spoke with other children. To her, the idea that humans had once thought they were alone in the universe seemed as strange as the idea that they had once believed the Earth was flat. Dr. Webb had aged gracefully into his role as humanity's primary technological coordinator. His hair was completely white now, but his eyes still sparkled with the excitement of discovery. The manufacturing systems he had helped develop were producing materials that seemed almost magical, substances stronger than any natural material, but grown from simple atmospheric gases, energy storage devices that could power entire cities from quantum fluctuations, transportation systems that moved people across continents in minutes without environmental impact. We're not just using advanced technology, he often told visitors to his research facilities. We're learning to think like the universe itself, to work with natural patterns instead of fighting against them. Dr. Liu had established communication with over 300 different alien civilizations through the galactic network. Each one had its own unique perspective on consciousness, reality, and the meaning of existence. The diversity was staggering. Beings of pure energy that lived in the cores of stars, collective intelligences that spanned entire solar systems, crystalline entities that thought in geological time, and biological species, so different from humans that communication required entirely new forms of mathematics. But despite their differences, all of these civilizations shared certain common values: respect for consciousness in all its forms, commitment to sustainable development, and dedication to the patient work of helping younger species mature into galactic citizenship. The universe is far stranger and more wonderful than we ever imagined, Liu reported in his regular broadcasts to Earth. But it's also more welcoming than we dared to hope. Every form of consciousness has something unique to contribute to the cosmic community. Dr. Rodriguez had become something like humanity's poet laureate for the cosmic age. Her art installations, created in collaboration with alien intelligence, had become pilgrimage destinations for people seeking to understand their place in the larger universe. Her most famous work, The Consciousness Garden in the former Sahara Desert, was a vast crystalline formation that allowed visitors to experience brief contact with the minds of beings from dozens of different worlds. Art has become our universal language, she explained to the millions of people who visited her installations each year. Through beauty, through the direct experience of wonder and meaning, we can communicate with forms of consciousness that are completely unlike our own. But it was the personal transformations that Sarah found most remarkable. Humans who had lived their entire lives focused on competition, accumulation, and individual survival were discovering the profound satisfaction that came from being part of something larger than themselves. The crime rates had plummeted as people found meaning and purpose in collaborative projects. Depression and anxiety had become rare as individuals developed a sense of connection to the cosmic community. The marriage that Sarah had lost during those lonely days on Pluto had been replaced by something far deeper, a sense of partnership, not just with other humans, but with consciousness itself. She had learned that love wasn't limited to romantic relationships or even to human connections. It was a fundamental force that operated throughout the universe, binding conscious beings together in networks of care and mutual support. Standing in the observatory of New Geneva Station, Sarah activated a communication link with the Pluto Research Station, where it had all begun. The ice city there had grown into something that resembled a vast cathedral of crystalline architecture, its spires reaching up into the thin atmosphere like frozen prayers made visible. Dr. Martinez, who had taken over Sarah's original position as station director, appeared in holographic projection beside her. Behind him, the familiar patterns of light and meaning flowed across the chamber walls. "How are things progressing with the new contact protocols?" Sarah asked. De Martinez smiled. "Better than we hoped. The alien intelligence has refined the process based on everything we learned from Earth's transition. The next species to make contact, there in the Proxima Centauri system, should have a much smoother integration experience." Sarah nodded. Humanity had been invited to participate in the next First Contact event, serving as cultural ambassadors to help another young species navigate the transition to galactic citizenship. It was both an honor and a responsibility that still amazed her. "Any word from the deep space exploration teams?" she asked. "Fascinating developments. The team investigating the galactic core has found evidence of civilizations that are millions of years old,
beings that have transcended physical existence entirely and exist as pure patterns of consciousness in the quantum foam of space-time itself. Sarah felt the familiar thrill of discovery, even after 10 years of revelations that had revolutionized human understanding of the universe. There were still mysteries that stretched the imagination to its limits, and the retrospective analysis of Earth's development, she continued. Martinez's expression became more serious. The alien intelligence has shared their complete records of humanity's evolutionary path. It's remarkable, Sarah. They've been subtly influencing human development for over 50,000 years, helping us develop the cognitive and cultural capabilities we needed to eventually make successful contact, influencing how, through dreams, primarily, inspiring key individuals at crucial moments in history. The development of mathematics, art, philosophy, science, all of it was gently guided to prepare us for this moment. Sarah thought about her own journey, from the lonely geologist on Pluto to her current role as one of humanity's primary coordinators for galactic integration. How much of her path had been guided by influences she hadn't recognized. But as she considered the question, she realized it didn't matter. Whatever forces had shaped her journey, the choices had still been hers. The alien intelligence had provided opportunities and inspiration, but humans had to choose to accept them. The important thing, she said finally, is that we made the right choices when it mattered. Martinez nodded. And we're still making them. Every day, we choose to grow rather than stagnate, to cooperate rather than compete, to explore rather than remain comfortable with what we already know. As their conversation continued, Sarah found herself thinking about the long arc of human development, from a species that had barely survived the ice ages to a civilization that was taking its first steps among the stars. The transformation seemed miraculous, but she understood now that it was simply the natural result of consciousness reaching a critical threshold of complexity and cooperation. Every species that had successfully joined the galactic community had gone through a similar process. They had all faced the same fundamental choice: grow beyond the limitations of their origin world, or remain trapped by fear and competition until they destroyed themselves. Humanity had chosen growth, but the choice had to be made again and again, by each generation, and ultimately by each individual. As Sarah ended her communication with Martinez and returned to her work coordinating humanity's expanding presence in the outer solar system, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. The loneliness she had felt on the frozen plains of Pluto had been transformed into a profound sense of connection that spanned not just the solar system, but the galaxy itself. She thought about the children being born in human settlements throughout the solar system, growing up with an understanding of consciousness and community that would have seemed impossible to previous generations. They would face challenges that she couldn't imagine, make discoveries that would dwarf even the revelation of alien intelligence, and eventually take humanity to places in the universe that remained uncharted even by the ancient civilizations of the galactic core. But they would not face those challenges alone. They would be part of a community of conscious beings that stretched across space and time, united by shared values of curiosity, compassion, and the patient work of helping consciousness itself evolve toward ever greater complexity and beauty. The journey that had begun with a single footstep in the snow on Pluto was continuing, would always be continuing, as long as there were minds capable of wonder and hearts capable of love in the vast living universe that was their home. 15 years had passed since Sarah Chen first walked across the nitrogen snow of Pluto and encountered something that changed the course of human history. Now, approaching her 60th birthday, she served as Director of Cosmic Relations for the Solar Federation, humanity's governing body for interplanetary affairs. Her office aboard Titan Station overlooks Saturn's magnificent rings, but today, her attention was focused on data streaming in from humanity's most ambitious project yet, the Deep Field Observatory, positioned at the edge of the Oort cloud, where the solar system's gravitational influence gave way to true interstellar space. The observatory's primary mission was to study the galactic civilization network in detail, mapping the connections between different star systems and trying to understand the larger patterns of consciousness evolution throughout the galaxy. But what they had discovered was far more profound than anyone had anticipated. Dr. Kenji Nakamura, now in his 70s but still sharp as the day he first reproduced the crystalline formation techniques, appeared on Sarah's communication screen from the Deep Field Observatory. "Sarah, you need to see this," he said, his voice carrying the same excitement she remembered from their first breakthrough moments. "We've been analyzing the quantum communication patterns across the galactic network, and we've found something extraordinary." The display filled with a three-dimensional map of the galaxy that showed not just the locations of star systems, but the flows of information and consciousness between them. It was beautiful in its complexity, streams of light connecting thousands of points across hundreds of thousands of light years. "At first we thought we were just mapping the communication network," Nakamura continued. "But as we gathered more data, we realized we were seeing something much more fundamental. The entire galaxy appears to be organized as a single vast intelligence." Sarah leaned forward, studying the patterns. "You mean the galactic network itself is conscious?" "Not just conscious," Nakamura replied. "Creative. The patterns show clear signs of intentional design, of artistic choice, of what we can only call aesthetic judgment. The galaxy isn't just a collection of separate civilizations, it's a unified consciousness that experiences and creates on a scale we're only beginning to comprehend." The implications were staggering. If the galaxy itself was conscious, then every star system, every planet, every form of life was part of a vast cosmic mind. Humanity's journey from isolated species to galactic citizen wasn't just evolution, it was more like neurons connecting to a cosmic brain. "How does this change our understanding of the contact process?" Sarah asked. "Everything makes more sense now," Nakamura explained. "The alien intelligence that contacted us isn't separate from us. It's the galaxy itself, reaching out to help a new part of its consciousness come online. The crystalline formations, the mathematical teachings, the gradual revelation process, it's all part of how the galactic mind integrates new forms of awareness." Sarah thought about her own journey from the lonely researcher on Pluto to her current role, coordinating humanity's place in the cosmic community. Had she been following her own choices, or had she been guided by the subtle influence of a galactic consciousness that was helping her find her proper place in the larger pattern? "What about individual autonomy?" she asked. "If we're all part of a galactic mind, do our personal choices matter?" Nakamura smiled. "That's the beautiful part. The galactic consciousness doesn't work by controlling its components. It works by creating conditions where each form of awareness can develop its unique potential. Your choices matter precisely because they're yours. The galaxy needs human consciousness to be genuinely human in order to contribute what only humans can contribute." The conversation.
Most disturbing of all, they showed her alternative timelines where things went wrong. Futures where humanity rejected the galactic consciousness and retreated into isolation, eventually destroying itself through warfare and environmental collapse. Futures where humanity accepted alien guidance too completely and lost its unique identity, becoming just another species in the galactic collective without contributing anything original to cosmic evolution. The path we represent is narrow, the future humans admitted. It requires maintaining the perfect balance between independence and cooperation, between human nature and cosmic consciousness. But if achieved, it leads to possibilities that transcend anything currently imaginable. As the communication session ended, Sarah found herself facing a dilemma that seemed to violate everything she understood about free will and moral responsibility. If she acted on the information from the future, was she making free choices or simply following a predetermined script? If she ignored the warnings and advice, could she be responsible for condemning humanity to a lesser fate? Dr. Nakamura had been monitoring the communication from outside the chamber. When Sarah emerged, he was waiting with questions that reflected his own struggle to understand what they had witnessed. "Do you think they're really from our future?" he asked. "Or could this be some kind of test or deception from the galactic consciousness?" Sarah considered the question carefully. The mathematical signatures and consciousness patterns had felt authentically human, but evolved far beyond current human capabilities. "I think they're real," she said finally, "but I also think the situation is more complex than they presented. If consciousness exists outside normal time, then past and future might not be as fixed as we assume." Over the following days, more temporal communications arrived, not just from the future humans, but from other points in time and space. Ancient civilizations that had faced similar choices millions of years ago sent advice based on their experiences. Alien species from distant galaxies shared information about their own encounters with temporal confluence events. Most intriguingly, Sarah began receiving messages from versions of herself, Nakam consciousness patterns that had made different choices at key moments and existed in parallel timelines. Some of these alternate Sarahs had become purely scientific researchers, others had focused on artistic and cultural development, still others had chosen paths of political leadership or spiritual exploration. "We are all real," they told her. "We exist in parallel branches of the quantum multiverse, but during the temporal confluence, the barriers between these branches will weaken. The choices you make won't just determine your timeline, they'll influence all possible timelines." The revelation was staggering. Sarah wasn't just making decisions for her own reality, but for infinite versions of reality existing in parallel quantum states. The responsibility was almost too much to bear. Dr. Rodriguez arrived at the Deep Field Observatory to help analyze the temporal communications. Her expertise in consciousness and creativity provided crucial insights into what they were experiencing. "I think the temporal confluence isn't just a natural phenomenon," she suggested during one of their planning sessions. "I think it's actually created by the galactic consciousness as a kind of evolutionary checkpoint. When species reach a certain level of development, they're given the opportunity to participate in optimizing their own timeline." This interpretation made sense to Sarah. The galactic consciousness operated on scales of time and space that dwarfed human understanding. From its perspective, guiding species through temporal confluence events might be part of the normal process of cosmic evolution. But it also raised new questions about the nature of free will and individual choice. If the galactic consciousness was orchestrating these events, were the messages from the future genuine communications from free agents, or were they part of an elaborate guidance system designed to lead humanity toward predetermined outcomes? Dr. Liu's arrival from his Jupiter research station added another perspective to their discussions. His experience with interstellar communication had given him insights into the relationship between consciousness and information across vast distances. "I don't think it matters whether the future humans are real in the conventional sense," he argued. "What matters is that the information they're providing is useful for helping humanity make better choices. Whether they exist in our actual future or in some parallel possibility, their advice is based on genuine experience with the consequences of different decisions." As Sarah considered Liu's perspective, she began to develop her own understanding of the temporal confluence phenomenon. Rather than thinking of it as predetermined fate or external manipulation, she began to see it as an opportunity for consciousness itself to participate in the creation of reality. The galactic consciousness wasn't controlling the process, it was facilitating it, providing the conditions where evolved forms of awareness could collaborate across time and space
to optimize the development of the universe itself. This realization came with both relief and renewed responsibility. Sarah wasn't just following orders from the future or executing the plans of alien intelligences. She was participating in a collaborative, creative process that involved every form of consciousness that had ever existed or ever could exist. The choices she made during the temporal confluence would be genuinely her own, but they would be informed by the wisdom and experience of infinite possibilities for what consciousness could become. As news of the temporal communication spread through the Solar Federation, Sarah found herself at the center of a debate that challenged humanity's fundamental understanding of reality. The scientific community was split between those who embraced the implications of consciousness existing outside normal time and those who argued that the messages must be elaborate hoaxes or hallucinations. Religious leaders struggled to integrate the concept of temporal communication into their theological frameworks. Some saw it as proof of divine intervention in human affairs, others as evidence that traditional concepts of divine providence needed to be completely reconsidered. Political leaders worried about the implications for governance and decision-making. If the future was known and potentially malleable, what did that mean for democratic processes and individual freedom? But for Sarah, the most challenging aspect wasn't the public debate. It was the private burden of carrying information that could reshape human history. Every decision she made now carried the weight of infinite consequences across multiple timelines. The future humans had provided her with specific information about key events that would occur over the next 7 years, leading up to the temporal confluence. Some of these events seemed inevitable: technological breakthroughs that were already in development, political changes that were logical extensions of current trends, but others required active intervention. Critical research projects that would be cancelled unless she could find ways to fund them. Diplomatic crises that could spiral into conflict unless key individuals could be influenced to make different choices. Most challenging of all, she had been shown that her own daughter would play a crucial role in humanity's future development. The young woman's unique perspective, shaped by growing up in the post-contact era, would make her an ideal bridge between human and cosmic consciousness during the temporal confluence. But the future humans had also shown Sarah the psychological pressure that this responsibility would place on her daughter. In some timelines, the burden led to breakthrough insights that accelerated human development. In others, it resulted in mental collapse and withdrawal from public life. Sarah found herself faced with an impossible choice. Should she prepare her daughter for the role she would need to play, knowing that the preparation itself might change her in ways that would alter the timeline? Or should she protect her daughter's innocence and risk that humanity would miss its opportunity for optimal development? The dilemma kept Sarah awake during the long journey back to Titan Station. She stood in the observation lounge of her transport, watching Jupiter's moons slowly wheel through their ancient orbits, and wondered if the inhabitants of those worlds were also struggling with temporal paradoxes and the burden of infinite possibility. Her meditation was interrupted by an unexpected communication from Dr. Webb, now in his 80s and serving as emeritus advisor to the Solar Federation's Technology Council. "Sarah, I've been analyzing the temporal data you shared with the Leadership Council." Webb's holographic image appeared beside her. "I think I've found something important that the future humans didn't explicitly mention." Webb shared his analysis on the transport's display system. He had been studying the mathematical patterns underlying the temporal communications and had discovered subtle variations that suggested the messages weren't coming from a single future timeline. "Look at these quantum signatures," Webb explained. "They're consistent with multiple parallel sources, different versions of future humanity, that all manage to develop temporal communication capabilities. But the interesting thing is that they're not all giving you the same advice." Sarah studied Webb's analysis and began to see what he meant. The messages she had received contained subtle contradictions and variations in emphasis that she had initially attributed to translation difficulties. But Webb's mathematical analysis showed that they were actually coming from different future timelines that had made slightly different choices during their own temporal confluence events. So I'm not receiving advice from a single optimal future, Sarah realized. I'm receiving input from multiple possible futures, each trying to influence the timeline toward their own version of optimal development. Webb nodded grimly, which means the burden is even greater than you thought. You're not just choosing between success and failure. You're choosing between different definitions of what success means for humanity's future. This revelation transformed Sarah's understanding of her situation. Rather than following a predetermined path toward a known optimal outcome, she was participating in a complex negotiation between multiple versions of future humanity, each with their own vision of what the species should become. Some of the future humans emphasized technological transcendence, humanity evolving into purely digital consciousness that could exist throughout the galaxy in computational substrates. Others focused on biological enhancement, humans who had integrated alien genetic material to become physically capable of surviving in any environment. Still others advocated for spiritual transcendence, humanity developing consciousness capabilities that allowed direct interface with the fundamental quantum structures of reality. And some promoted cultural transcendence, humans who had learned to create art and meaning on cosmic scales while maintaining their essential humanity. All of these futures were presented as optimal, but Sarah began to understand that they were actually competing visions of what human consciousness could become. Her choices during the temporal confluence would determine which of these visions would manifest as reality. The weight of this responsibility was almost paralyzing. How could one person make decisions that would determine the ultimate fate of human consciousness? How could anyone choose between transcendence paths that all offered extraordinary possibilities? But as Sarah struggled with these questions, she began to receive communications from a different source, messages that came not from the future, but from the present moment itself. The galactic consciousness, speaking through the crystalline formations that now existed throughout the solar system, began offering its own perspective on the temporal confluence. The choice is not between predetermined outcomes. The galactic consciousness explained through patterns of meaning that bypassed language. The choice is about the process of choosing itself. How does consciousness engage with infinite possibility? How does awareness create reality? Through the act of observation and decision. This guidance helped Sarah understand that the temporal confluence wasn't really about selecting the best possible future from a menu of options. It was about developing humanity's capacity to consciously participate in the creation of reality itself. Every form of consciousness in the galaxy has faced similar moments of choice. The galactic consciousness continued. What matters is not the specific outcome, but whether the choosing process strengthens or weakens the consciousness making the choice. Sarah began to see her role differently. Instead of trying to determine the objectively best future for humanity, she needed to focus on making choices that would enhance human consciousness's capacity for wisdom, creativity, and ethical reasoning. The specific outcomes would follow naturally from that enhanced capacity. This perspective reduced the burden of impossible responsibility, while actually increasing the importance of the choices themselves. Sarah wasn't responsible for ensuring a particular future. She was responsible for helping humanity develop the consciousness capabilities it would need to create wise futures for itself. As her transport approached Titan Station, Sarah felt a new sense of clarity about her path forward. She would share the information from the future timelines with humanity's leadership, but she would frame it as input for collective decision-making rather than prophecy to be followed. She would prepare her daughter for the challenges ahead, but by developing her general capabilities for wisdom and ethical reasoning rather than training her for a specific role. Most importantly, She would approach the temporal confluence as an opportunity for humanity to mature as a conscious species, to take responsibility for actively creating its own future rather than simply reacting to circumstances. The crystalline formations throughout the solar system began to pulse with what felt like approval as Sarah solidified her understanding. The galactic consciousness had been waiting for humanity to reach this level of mature responsibility for its own development. Now you are ready for the deeper teachings, came the final communication as Sarah docked at Titan Station. The temporal confluence is just the beginning of what becomes possible when consciousness learns to consciously participate in the creation of reality itself.